I'm so overwhelmed and so happy to be here. I'm so privileged to be back here at this place where we moved into this place, this building in 2002, and from 2002 till 2008, standing right here, every Sunday for 6 years was my favorite time of the week, my favorite place to be every week, being with you like this. And I'm so honored and happy and joyful to be back here again. Matt, thank you so much. Talk about rock star pastors. Matt is a rock star pastor, and he's so good, so good. And Ginger and your family, God is so good to Parkway by giving you such a great pastor and leader and the great staff that you have here. And I'm just when Matt, you called me. I think like back in April when you called me and asked me to come do this morning, and August seemed like so far away. But for these past several months, my mind has constantly been flooded with joyful, happy, wonderful memories and people who were such a part of my life at what will always be forever and ever one of the most happy, wonderful experiences I've ever had here, which was being the enormous, unspeakable privilege of being the pastor of Parkway Methodist Church. And the fact is, it's impossible, really, that we're all here doing this today, 20 years later. It really is, because when the Methodist Church decided to start a new church in this fast-growing part of Southwest Houston, um, I'm sure they looked and called a bunch of people, but everybody said no. And finally, they said, "Well, who are we going to get?" And somebody said, "Well, Paul Klein's is away at school." I was at school at the time, and they said, "Well, get him to do it because he doesn't have a job and he needs a job." And so Bob Hayes, the district superintendent, called me, now Bishop Hayes, but he called me and says, "Hey, Paul, we started a new church in Southwest Houston, and we're wondering if you'd be come and be the pastor and start this new church." And I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea what that meant or what was involved. That the only full-time ministry job I had was as an associate pastor at First Methodist in downtown Houston, which at that time in the early 90s was the largest Methodist church in the country. I mean, it had 12,000 members. And so I went from the pinnacle of prestige, I mean, the largest Methodist church in the country, to literally the smallest Methodist church in the country. I mean, there was not one person that we knew who was already part of it. And so Kelly and she was 3 months pregnant with Stephen, who is now about to begin his second year at school in Austin. But we came here. Every possession we owned was in that big green trailer. Remember that big green trailer, some of you? That big green trailer, and everything we owned was in that big green trailer. We moved to new territory on July 4th of 1996 and unloaded that trailer and put everything in our house over there, 4319 East Meadows. And so here we are. You know, we had nothing. When in those days, Matt, when the Methodist Church the conference started a new church, they gave you what I affectionately called $39,000, 5 acres, and a pat on the back, and that was it. I mean, that was all. $39,000 was our entire budget. It was my salary and all the startup costs for starting a brand new church, and that was it. And no people, no names, really, no nothing. And so we unloaded the trailer on July 4th, 1996, and then I walked to my next door neighbor's house. I didn't know them, and if you know me, I'm an introvert, so this is very, very outside of my comfort zones. I went to our next door neighbor's house and introduced myself to them, said, "I just moved in, and I'm starting a new church in my living room. Would you like to be a part?" And I quickly went to the next house, and the next house, and the next house. And I walked down my street and the next street and the same spiel at every house, knocking on doors of strangers, saying, "I'm Paul, I just moved in. I'm starting a new church in my living room. Would you like to be a part?" Can you imagine how many different ways there are to say never in a million years? Because I heard them all that day. But we got a few people, Vince and Cheryl Cordova, who are still here. They lived across the street from us, and oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Bob and Celeste Collin lived a few streets down. They came over. Jim Strain, who I knew from First Methodist, who's playing the bass here still. And a few others. Gathered in our living room. There were 12 of us all together in July 28th. Matter of fact, I found it the other day. I have the bulletin from the very first gathering at our home at 4319, and the sermon I preached. All my sermon notes are in there. It was a long sermon that Sunday. I don't preach long sermons anymore, relatively, and so. But oh my goodness, it was so exciting. We gathered in my living room, and it was, I mean, our house, tiny house, because we, $39,000 was, not even, that wasn't even our salary, it was less than that. But our living room was where we met, and what was to be Stephen's room was the nursery, and our kitchen was the fellowship hall, and we had a little study that was the Parkway Church offices, and I mean, it was just all in that little house, and we met there, and it was so great. Our worship leader, Wayne came along a little later, but our worship leader was my CD player. And which had its pros and cons. In some ways, it was awesome because I had the remote control, and I could control. If I didn't like the song, just press forward, and if it was time to stop, I just press stop, and it was so awesome. And so we would just, that we'd sing along with an old Promise Keepers CD was our worship leader, and oh, it was so exciting. But I didn't know what I was doing, and Matt, you talked about 20 years. I mean, I didn't know if we were going to make it to the next month, but we did, and people believed in a vision of a church that could change people's lives, and so we grew, and we quickly, on this Sunday 20 years ago, we moved into Walker Station Elementary School in the cafeteria there, and it felt legitimate, and it was so exciting. And we moved into the cafeteria, and I tell you, I was so excited that day. I did something that Sunday. I did something that Sunday that no preacher in 2,000 years of Christianity has ever done. I did that Sunday. I forgot to take the offering. I was so excited. We went to the service, and I forgot. So I got home away. We forgot to take it. It was too late. Too late. so the next Sunday we took an offering, and the first offering, I'll never forget this. The first offering at Parkway Methodist Church was $212. That was I was like, I thought I'd won the lottery. Like, look at all this money! I was so excited. I counted it 100 times. I was like, really, 200? It was so exciting, but God blessed us and brought people to us and brought Wayne to us, and so instrumental in kind of helping us launch this great thing called Parkway Methodist Church. And we put together, the church grew, and we started organizing ourselves as a church, and everybody just rolled up their sleeves and helped us, and we formed committees, and we formed a finance committee. Rick Figueroa, he's here this morning, is part of our first finance committee, and I didn't know anything about that, and Rick has tried so hard, as patient as he could be, to teach me. Our first budget was $71,000. That was our first budget for the first full year of Parkway. And I remember we were at Rick's house because we didn't have any place to meet, and we were going over the budget, and it didn't make sense. It was impossible. I remember us talking about it, and there's no way that we can raise $71,000 to support the ministries and all the things that we were doing that first full year as a church. It just seemed impossible. But then again, the impossible happened, and the church just kept growing, and people kept coming, and we moved from Walker Station. We started filling it up, and we had to do something because we had to get out of Walker Station. There just wasn't enough space in there, and River Point was meeting at the club, and they were moving out of the club, and the club came empty, and thought, well, maybe we could move into the club. But we had to sign a contract, and it was way more than we could afford. And as we talked about it, it just seemed impossible to think that this little church could move from Walker Station to this big, beautiful club. And I didn't know how we could do it. We didn't have the money, we didn't have the people, but somehow or other, we just believed that God, if we trusted in God, it could happen. And so we did. We just held our breath together, and we trusted in God, and we moved. It was in '99 that we moved over to the club. Easter of '99, we moved into the club, and it was huge, enormous, beautiful space, a double gym, and we were putting children and youth in every hallway and crack and crevice and classroom in that club, and we just filled it up, and those were fun days. I mean, we were set up and tear down teams, and we had this big Bob Ryan. Remember that big white truck, and Bart Hatfield, that big white truck. We put everything in that big truck, and every week Bob would go early and pick up the truck and bring it to the club, and we'd unload it, and after church we'd load it back in, and I mean that was exciting, for like 2 Sundays. But after a while, it wasn't all that exciting anymore. And we were loading and unloading the truck, and in the summer it was so hot, and Wayne was our worship leader, and he always went so long, and so the service went long, and I couldn't get him to stop, and I remember one time, I remember it was so hot, and we were after church, and everybody was tired and hungry and a little grumpy, and we were loading stuff back in the truck and sweating, and I don't remember who I said it to, and if I did, I wouldn't say his name, but I remember saying, one day we're going to look back on these days as the good old days. And my mom taught me not to say those kinds of words, so I can't repeat what they said back to me. But those were the good old days, and they were fun. And they were fun because everybody just pitched in, and if it was grabbing toys out of the room or just whatever it was, everybody pitched in, and it was so fun and so exciting. And God just blessed us. And I remember Richard Black. Our offices were 2 little portable buildings, and Richard Black came in my office one time and had a map of new territory on the wall as our mission field. And Richard was looking at the map, and he turned and looked at me. And at that time we had 10 acres of property. Right where Cius Ridge is right now was the original. We started with 5, and we bought 5 more. I don't know how we could do it, but we somehow managed to buy 5 more acres. And Richard was looking at that map, and he said, "Well, Paul, I have an idea. What if we take these 10 acres and make a deal with the Markborough, the developer of new territory, and swap our 10 acres for 15 acres on the corner of Homeward Way and New Territory Boulevard?" And I said, "Well, Richard, that's a great idea. But that's impossible. I mean, it's impossible that we could pull that off." But somehow we believed in the impossible. And then we swapped with them, and they built that neighborhood over there and put us right here at this great corner of New Territory Boulevard and Homeward Way. And we were at the club and growing, and pretty soon we outgrew the club. It's amazing. We had space for worship, but we couldn't put any more children any more places. And we didn't know what to do because we weren't big enough to build our own building yet. That was unthinkable. And so I remember, I'll never forget, we had a little metal ministry center building, and we were having like a trustees meeting in there. We're all sitting around the table, and we were wringing our hands over what to do. We didn't know what to do because we didn't have enough space for children and youth in the club, but we didn't have enough people or money to justify beginning the process of building a building. And so we were just sitting there, and we were just kind of throwing out ideas on the table. What are we going to do? And we talked about all kinds of ridiculous things. We talked about building a bubble. Anybody remember that? That bubble, like the Texans practice field. We're going to build this bubble and put it on our property. Or we talked about doing some kind of Amish, everybody build it, build a little thing on our property. And there were no good ideas. And the thought of building a building, it was impossible. But I'll never forget, we all just stopped. We bowed our heads and we prayed. We said, "God, we don't know what to do. And so you lead us, and we'll follow." And I'm telling you, I'm not a voice of God person, an audible voice, but in that little room, in that little metal building around that table, God spoke. And as soon as we said amen, every single person around that table knew it. It was time. It was time. And if we trusted God again, He would make the impossible happen again. And so we began to put together a capital campaign. Jim and Karen Morris, and they just wielded that campaign into being. And we had a building on faith. We had this capital campaign to raise money, and the Commitment Sunday, if you remember, we had a worship under the big top. We rented a tent and put it over here on our property, and that was Commitment Sunday. We had an outdoor worship service under the tent, and I remember the lender telling us that this building was going to cost 1.5 something million dollars, and the lender told us we had to have $900,000 in commitments in order to go forward. $900,000 in commitments might as well have been, all the money that Donald Trump has or doesn't have. I don't know, but it might as well have been all the money in the world to me. But on that Commitment Sunday, all the commitments turned in, and I was gripping. I mean, I didn't. Nobody knew, and we counted it all up, and it was $1.14 million that was committed that Sunday to build this building, and I knew it. God was going to make this happen. And He did, and we built this beautiful building, and this became our spiritual home for us and for people all around this area, and the nursery. And then we still didn't have good space for children and youth, and so we had to do something. And so we found a company that would sell us what they called modular buildings. That's like a garbage man calling himself a sanitation engineer. I mean, they were trailers, 10 trailers that, put them all together makes this large modular building. And so we did. So we bought these modular buildings, and I'll never forget when they brought them here. It was one of those, new territory, not supposed to have those things. So it was one of those ask forgiveness, not permission things. And so we bought them, and they brought them here. And when they brought them here to our property, it was a big rainstorm. And so all the ground around here was soaking wet. And they brought them and dropped them off, and they all got stuck in the mud right in front, right along Homeward Way. And so nobody could do anything about them until the land. So like 2 weeks, it looked like a Parkway trailer park out here. I mean, it was so embarrassing. And so, but finally they moved them over there, and we kind of hid them over there behind CVS and planted wax ligustrums around them to hide them, and hoping that nobody from the development would ever see them or anything, or just ignore them, pretend they're not there or something. And so, but that became our children and youth ministry center. Our offices were over there, and God just continued to bless us, and we continued to grow. And then we came to another point where we could not cram any more children or youth into that ministry center building. We had to do something else. We had to build a building that would be an attractive, compelling place for families all around here to find their spiritual home, and a place where children and youth would want to come. And yet to do what we wanted to do, well, it was impossible. There was no way that we could. But again, we just trusted God and believed that if we followed Him, He would make a miracle happen. I mean, He did it from our living room, from Walker Station to the club to here, and we just knew that He would do it again. And so we put our faith and confidence in Him. We rolled up our sleeves and we committed. And then we built this beautiful, wonderful ministry center building over here and opened it up in February. Our grand opening was in end of January 2008, and just threw open the doors literally to our community and said, come here to this place, and you will find your spiritual home here. And every step of the way, it just seemed like it was impossible. But when we turned our attention to God and said, God, if you would do this, we'll follow. And over again, the story of Parkway again and again and again has been God making the impossible possible when we trusted Him. But our story is really not just about property and buildings. It was simply that property and buildings were environments that made ministry happen. And over again, wherever we were, ministry happened. Wherever we gathered together, it didn't matter where ministry happened, in small groups and large groups and grow groups and Sunday school classes and confirmation classes and business meetings. Every time, every place we gathered together, ministry happened, and it was so exciting to see over and over again in all multiple different expressions. And not just ministry, but missions. And we began to develop, God developed in us a missionary heart, a heart for the outsider, a heart for the person who is far from God, a heart for the person who didn't know God. And so God developed in our church a missionary heart, a desire to reach more people and people who were hurt and were broken and were lost. And so we began to, from this place, we began to serve others. And remember, we went to Four Corners, and we adopted that little apartment complex, a very low income part of Missouri City, and we began to go there and serve them. And we developed this great relationship with Bethel Temple Methodist Church in Hidalgo, Mexico. And we began a relationship with them every year, going down to Hidalgo, Mexico, and developing great relationships with this little Methodist church outside of Monterey. And so fun, and all those kindness outreaches that we did, just giving away water and snow cones and cupcakes and just serving people all throughout this community in Jesus' name, and demonstrating the kindness and grace of God in every possible way that we could. And even this building became a home away from home for Katrina victims. Remember, and I mean, we had bunk beds set up and showers, and I mean, this place became people's not just spiritual home, but literal home when they didn't have a home. And I mean, over and over and over again, missions and ministry happened through this church as we discovered the power of God, that He could use us to do great things. But again, the story of this church is not the story of property and buildings. It's not really the story of missions and ministry, though all those things happened. The story of this church is a story of people. People. It was a movement, always, from the very beginning, it was a movement of people that God moved through to change the eternal destinies of hundreds and literally thousands of people, both here and literally around the world. A movement of people who our lives were intertwined together, connected in a permanent, inseparable way. People that shared our lives together. Every place we were, every time we gathered together. Through victories and through valleys, through unexplained twists and unexplainable miracles, through great ideas and colossally bad ideas that were always mine, by the way. I own them. But every time, every way, this church was about people. We intertwined our lives together and believed in God and did something great. And it was so exciting. We were living out the one another's of the New Testament, right? Love one another, care for one another, pray for one another, forgive one another, encourage one another. And we did it, and we laughed together and cried together, and through births and baptisms and weddings and funerals and meals, lots and lots and lots of food. We ate. We shared our lives together, and I'm telling you, every single time throughout the history of the church, every single time people came together and intertwined their lives with each other, God showed up and did something great. And that's what He did here, over and over and over again. And so our story is not property and buildings or missions and ministry. Our story it's people. Human beings. Flawed, misfits, broken, wounded human beings who came together and became a movement of God to move the world. And that's the other part of the reality that has been, and will always be Parkway. It's not just people, but it's people who believed in a great God. People who believed in a God who loved and forgave and gave second and third and fourth chances. People who believed in a God that could and would and was ready to do anything through a group of people who would be willing to trust in Him. We believed in a God, and that belief and confidence that we had in God, who was always there. Sometimes He was a silent partner. Sometimes He was the cheerleader on the sidelines. Sometimes He was the coach grabbing our face mask and saying, "I said go that way." And sometimes he was in the stands with all the angels and all the company of heaven, cheering and celebrating, saying, "That's my child." But God was always present. He was always there. And what I hope you hear this morning is not just a history of this great church, but I hope you hear the truth that transcends the history of this church. And that is the truth that God is always there. He's always there. He's never left. And the amazing truth is that He will never leave. He will never, ever leave. He's always there. Sometimes the silent partner, sometimes the cheerleader, sometimes the coach, sometimes the one in the stands with the company of heaven saying, "That's my child." But God is real and He's always there. Through valleys and through victories, through unexpected twists and unexplainable miracles, through great decisions and colossal failures, God is always there. That's the truth that transcends the truth of Parkway. It's the truth that's always true for all of us. No matter who we are, no matter where we come from, no matter what we've done, the truth is God is always there. And when we go through our valleys, and you have and I have been through our valleys, the truth is that we can cling to is that God is always there. And my valleys, I was sharing with my church in Bay Harbor in League City just a couple of weeks ago, how real this truth has been for me in the past years. And I clung to this great truth, this so perfectly, beautifully expressed in this wonderful verse in Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10. Isaiah 41, verse 10 has somehow become my life verse. The great, wonderful, beautiful, grace-filled truth where God says to Paul Kleins, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This is the great truth that transcends the truth of our own lives, our own existence, our own victories and our own failures, that God is always there for us. He will never leave you. Or as it says, equally beautiful and powerful in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5. Where God has said, "I will never leave you. No, I will not ever forsake you." I was telling my people again just a couple of weeks ago, I love this verse in Hebrews 13:5. It's a poorly worded verse. And translators, in translating from Greek to English, have had a hard time correctly translating this verse. Because in the original Greek, this verse has two double negatives in it, which Melinda and Carol McClellan, y'all know a double negative, right? A double negative makes a what? A positive. A double negative makes a positive in the English language, but in the Greek language, a double negative only makes the point stronger. And this particular verse in Hebrews 13:5 has two double negatives in it. And actually has two double negatives and a single negative in the original Greek. And the translators have a hard time translating, but the best way to translate this verse in Hebrews 13:5 is very simple. It's Jesus saying, "I will never, 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 never leave you." When we started this thing in our living room, that was the truth. And when we moved to Walker Station and then to the club and then to here and built this and every place we were, every place we went, we gathered together and believed in a great God and the truth that transcends the truth of our own lives. And that is through everything, God is still there. And so our story is, as Matt rightly said, it's not finished yet. There's still chapters to write, still stories to tell, still unwritten events that in the future we'll look back on and laugh at, and the hard times we go through we'll look back on and say, "These are the good old days." And God will push us out of our comfort zones to go up to people we don't know very well and engage with them and invite them to come and be a part of something great. And So whatever your unwritten chapters in your life are, whatever unwritten stories yet to be written are, cling and hang on to this great truth. That God will never, never leave you. He said it. I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. That's our story. And I'm sticking to it. Will you bow your heads and pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you for this great congregation of people. Saints of yours, people of God, broken, misfits, sometimes such little faith, and then in the next moment, such great faith. Thank you for the people that you have brought through these doors. Some who are blessedly still here, and others who have traveled the world through births and baptisms, and weddings and funerals, through laughter and tears. You brought us together to share our lives for a season. And we are so profoundly grateful that through it all, you have been our God, whispering to us again and again in victories and valleys and twists and miracles. You whispered in our ear that we don't need to fear or be afraid because you are our God. You will strengthen us and help us and uphold us with your mighty right hand. And that you will never, 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 never leave us. And thank you for that great truth. Because we need it today. We need it for our world. We need it for our nation. We need it for our church. We need it for our family, for our lives. We need it for this moment and every moment from now till you return. So thank you that it's true. That you've never left us and that you are with us now. And so let the miracles keep pouring in. The miracle that is Parkway that will continue on for generations and generations to come, inviting people of all kinds of people to come and experience the greatness and the grace of God. And so help us, Lord, to be those people that you love so much, to live up to what you've called us to be a part of the miracles yet to be told, because we believe that you make the impossible possible. So do it again, God. Do it today for the mountains that people in this room are facing today. Make the impossible possible. Help us to believe. In Jesus' name.